Hi, and welcome back to Continual. It's time to saddle up those dragons and be riding off into the lands of Pern. I am your host, Jim Nettles, and we have a full house this evening. So let's go around and see who is coming along for the ride. So, Kacey, you are up first.
Hi, I'm Kacey Ezell. I write emotionally charged adventure, fantasy, and science fiction. You can find all of my work and all of my links and all of the good stuff at CaseyEzell.net or .com. Either one works. And I literally built my life around trying to be a dragon rider.
Lee?
Hi, I'm Lee Martindale. I'm a named bard. I write short stories, mostly fantasy and science fiction, occasional space opera. I also edit themed original anthologies, and I was introduced to Pern probably 50 years ago, and I've been a devotee ever since.
Dennis?
I'm Dennis Myers. I write science fiction in the far future. My first series, Rise of the Automated Empire, is available on Amazon, and you can find everything else about me at automatedempire.com.
Carole?
I am Carole Stokes, a frequent continual panelist, also under the name Ellis Colton. I write MM romance.
Melissa?
Hey, I'm Melissa. I write sci-fi and fantasy, and I sneak in romance wherever I can because I write what I love to read. And I was so mad when I found out as a kid that I could not be a Green Dragon Rider that I joined the Air Force, as one does, right, Kacey? And then I
Yeah.
wrote a book about Dragon Riders because love.
Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy Van Camp, and I write speculative poetry for the most part. I also occasionally write Regency romance based on Austen's books. I love Annie McCaffrey's work. In fact, I think some of the first Dragon Rider books are the first fantasy, well, slash science fiction books I've ever read. Fell in love with them, begged our librarian to bring more, and she did on my request. And I've been hooked ever since.
And Marisa.
Hi, I am Marisa Wolf. I write science fiction and fantasy that ends with hope, no matter how not hopeful circumstances might be along the way. That's probably something I picked up from Anne McCaffrey. So she was one of my first obsessions when I was a kid. I did not join the Air Force about it, but I did write Pern fan fiction for more than 20 years. So.
Dragon romance. I can feel it coming. Never mind. So, I want to kind of start with everybody's kind of started kicking off a little bit of that notion of where you got your introduction to the world of Pern. I know this is one of those things that I read when I was a kid. Because again, who doesn't want to go like toast their classmates and know that they're crunchy with ketchup? But beyond that, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the bigger influence that the bigger Pern universe has had on you. What is it about the Pern universe that pulled you in, kept you there, and kind of has been an influence for you? So, Kacey, I'm going to throw that one to you first.
All right, so I started reading Pern because I was an annoying child who would not leave my mother alone and bugging her for about, I need something new to read, Mom. I need something new to read, Mom. And so she put a copy of Dragon Drums in my hands, which upon reflection was kind of a dirty trick because it's like book 3 in the young adult trilogy. But I read it and I loved it. I fell in love with the world. I fell in love with the fire lizards, and I especially fell in love with the dragons. And I wasn't kidding when I said that I based most of my life decisions on being a dragon rider. I was, besides being an annoying child, I was also kind of a logical one. And I looked around and realized that there weren't a lot of dragons to be had in life right now. So I figured the next closest thing was that I would go and learn to fly aircraft. And so I did. I literally became a pilot because that was as close as I could get to becoming a dragon rider. And so it's fair to say that thanks to Pern, I served 23 years in the United States Air Force, learned how to fly helicopters, met my husband, had my children. It's been foundational for for my entire life. So thank you, Anne. I appreciate you.
All right, Lee, how about for you?
Well, the first McCaffrey I ever read was The Ship Who Sank.
Hmm,
And
very good.
it really grabbed me because at the time I was, well, I still am short. Um, I was fat. I was in a body that society didn't care about. And she gave me a glimpse of what it was like if somebody liked, saw something but the body. The next thing I happened to trip across was the first of the Dragon Rider book. And from then on, it was hook, line, sinker, and cork. Um, uh, even before I even thought about writing for a living, um, I was looking at something that was tightly constructed. The world building was phenomenal. And these were people. They struck me more real than some of the other writers I have read. I would happily live in that universe. Of course, I'd be coming out of Harper Hall, but it was, I don't know, it was like I'd gone home.
Dennis, how about for you?
Well, I have to blame this one on my mother because my mother was a devout feminist, and so she collected female authors. And she handed me the 3 volume hardcover of the first series and said I should read it. And I told her, well, I didn't want to because it was fantasy. And she says, try it. And that's when I discovered science fiction dragons, and I fell in love with the world, and it just, oh, time travel. I mean, yeah. Uh, and that was like in 1979. So,
Carol?
So my mother was a voracious reader, which I knew even as a child, and yet, as the years have gone on, I've grown to appreciate the vastness of the range of what she read because it all trickled down to me because I started reading everything she had. And I discovered Pern like in elementary school. She she had them, and they came along with a bunch of other books that really just affected my whole worldview around the same time. I was reading the Heinlein young adult stuff. I was reading Asimov. So I was reading a lot of hard science fiction. But then in the fantasy, I had Narnia and I had Tolkien and then I had Pern. And the thing that has gripped me so much about Pern, besides the fact that they have these fantastic dragons that you can ride, was her world building, the completeness of it, the detail, the richness, really was captivating. And the other thing was she created such a unique social structure that, even as a kid, I realized how incredibly unique this social structure was. And just found it fascinating. And that ties in with that whole world building, where when you read one of those books, you are really, really transported. Um, Even when you're reading certain science fiction stuff, it's extrapolations of where we are. And there's nothing extrapolated about Pern. It's like way out there in, some area of space that we'll never be fortunate enough to discover. Although who needs thread anyway? So it was really, really captivating and just opened a whole new door in terms of what was out there to be read and to be discovered. Um, so yeah, I can't say I've read it recently, but it is as vivid, it's still so vivid in my head because I read it like 15,000 times. And images stay with it, and phrases have stayed with me, the concepts have stayed with me. So it's not only this a whole new creation that nobody else has even come close to duplicating, but it's lasted. It has just, its legacy has just gone on and on in the world and in my head.
So, Melissa, how about for you? How
So there I was, all of 11 years old in seventh grade. And I was so convinced I was going to do my report for English class on, I think it was either Goosebumps or Animorphs. Like, it's totally made sense to my 11-year-old brain. And my seventh grade teacher, bless her, was like, sweetie, no. You need to go get a book from the adult section of your library or bookstore. Go forth. I'm like, okay, Dad. So we went to the bookstore and I found Dragonflight. And that cover with the dragon on it, I'm like, yep, this is the one. And I was so, like I said, I was so mad that I could not be a Green Dragon Rider because 11-year-old me was like, wait, there you can have a bond with another creature that will love you, all the things that you don't like about yourself, they love you not in spite of it, but because it's part of who you are. Like, oh, that was huge. That was foundational as a child. So it's definitely I'm with y'all. I've read it all of the books so many times, and it's a huge part of my life. I love them.
Wendy?
My goodness. I read the first book. I believe it was Dragon Song, just like Melissa. And I was in junior high, and it was one of the books in the quote unquote new science fiction fantasy section that our librarian was curating for our junior high school. It was a brand new school. There were very few books available. And she was like, oh, why don't you give one of these a try? And I absolutely fell in love with it. I loved Minali. I was able to connect with the character. I was a very geeky loner kind of girl who hung out in the library a lot. My parents didn't understand me. They were the salt of the earth kind of people. It's starting to sound familiar, isn't it? Um, and watching Minali escape from this kind of drudgery of a life to join Harper Hall and be able to express herself creatively as an artist. That was everything I wanted as a child. And I think, and of course later I read all the other books. I still loved all the dragon writing and for the same reasons all of you stated. But for me, Harper Hall is the place I love the best. I love the fact that Robert Tin was kind of the secret mastermind behind everything. And but I like that everything he did was connected to music and this music was connected to the well-being of this entire society. And those ideas have stuck with me. And I've read almost everything Anne McCaffrey has written. And I truly believe her writing and her style of writing, her style of world building is what makes me the writer I am today. Everything she's done is in the back of my mind as I create my own worlds, although my world's very different and go in different directions. But that same quality of how you place things into the story and the pacing and all that, it's very much a part of me, and I'm very grateful that I've read her books.
Marisa?
It's Michael Whalen's fault. The cover of The White Dragon might as well have hooked me behind my eyeballs and dragged me to the library shelf. And I devoured that book. I had no idea what, 80% of the politics were. I was also maybe in fifth grade, I don't even know. But I loved Ruth and I wanted to shake Jackson. Like even at that age, I wanted to shake Jackson a little bit, but Ruth loved him, so I loved him. And I read that book so many times. I took it out from the library so many times. The librarian ordered a new copy because the cover fell off, and I kept that one. So that's the one that I still have in my collection. She also, because at that time I could only read what the library had or what I found in the used bookstore. That was what was available to me. And so I never read things in order. And the librarian was like, "Girl, there are more books in this series." And I was like, "How many?" And she's like, "So many." So then, I read Ramoth seeing Lessa for the first time, and that impression, like if I wasn't already lost, that was the end. Like how wonderful Lessa was, how beautiful, how perfect. And the whole time Lessa is a jerk, and I loved that. So I did not appreciate that until I was older. But one of the reasons that Anne McCaffrey remained an obsession, beyond the fact that she is for sure part siren, is that all of her characters, especially her female characters, are not likable and sweet and perfect. They were jerks and they had edges and they wanted things, and I was obsessed. And I say was, but I think we can all tell that it still really matters to me.
I don't hear a whole lot of was in
I
any of
know
this
it's pretty
conversation.
present.
You,
I
you,
just reread for you guys for ConTinual, maybe last year. They did like the chapters that made you a reader and then made you a writer sort of thing, whatever that was. And I took out Dragon's Den from the library because all my books are in storage. And I read that chunk where they introduced themselves to General Bendon, and I still choke up. I still choke up right now thinking about it. My eyes are like, no, thank you. It's fine. So
I want to dive a bit into the larger world. And Lee, I'm going to start with you on this one, but I want to dive a bit into the larger world because there are complex politics. There are very defined social structures and political structures and conflicts and time periods, right? You know, we do start hopping through time. You get that view of what history at least is known and going back into time to see some of the origins and pieces like this. So, Lee, is there a particular period of time that resonates with you the most or that you want to hit on in terms of the world building, cultures, the pieces that really still hit you?
The the core base um, time period is uh, Lessa's search, Lessa's being searched, impressing Ramoth, and them from then on to oh, I think I don't go as much into after uh the White Dragon book, that period going on at that time. Um, but between the Rider culture and the Harper Hall culture, and one thing I want to get into, not quite to your question, in terms of Robinson, um, he is the very definition of a named bard by the old tradition. Every single duty, everything he does came under the job description of a named bard. Uh, and so beautifully written. And the fact that he is interweaving through all of this um, makes the time period of the Dragon Rider series and the Harper Hall series about my favorite. At by that time, uh, the craft halls and uh, halls and uh, the whole part of the social structure is very well defined, and anybody in the SAA could probably step into it fairly easily. Um, it's sort of kind of based on Celtic, I think. Um, Basically pre-Elizabethan, but I don't know. It's just the way they all mesh, the way they all uh, you understand where it comes from, and to a certain extent where it's going. Um, and there's just the relationship between the various classes also made for a great read. Uh, but I think that's my time period.
Dennis?
I think for me, it's just after that when they are exploring the southern continent and learning about their roots. And then, I'm sorry, but dragons in space. That just, that was so much fun. And then after reading so many books and so many things, finding out that the gap that was the big problem from the very first book was caused by them. And that whole time travel thing where they were correcting the orbit and all of that, that just amazed me. And I really thought that she brought the whole thing together really, really well.
Carol?
I'm really firmly planted in like the first six books there, the first three, and then the accompanying the Harper trilogy. Um, that was my core, and I just reread that so much, and that's the one that's most firmly like my era. I really did enjoy the explorations in the South, and then finding these first traces of how did they get there and stuff, and that was fascinating. You know what? I only read up to a certain point, and I have not read about dragons in space. So guess what I'm going to have to look into?
Okay.
Because that's new to me. So yay. But yeah, it's just that whole first thing. And I've read a bunch of the other side books. And to me, they're like very tasty side dishes to the main course of, those first six books. And I didn't worry so much about, where is this? And is this before? Is this after? Because they were each self-contained so well. And they did tie in at I wasn't ever left with the feeling of like, where did this come from? This came out of left field, or this is like out of whole cloth. And, and they always at least tied in, pertained. There was something linking them to the main story, which is what I really appreciated, that cohesiveness. But yeah, the first six for me are the meatiest part. But I will be looking into those space dragons.
I was going to pull it off my shelf and show you, but then I realized, no, my daughter took all those books.
I think it's All the Wares of Pern.
Yes.
Is that the one?
That's where you're going to see it.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, Melissa, what's your time period? What's the story for you?
Okay, so I read the first three books, right? And then my little, I think at this point I might have been 12. My little 12-year-old brain was blown away by Dragon's Dawn because I vaguely understood, I think, that it was supposed to be sci-fi, but I was more reading it as fantasy, and then I read Dragon's Dawn. I'm like, oh my God. Whoa, this is so cool. Like this opening up with like the spaceship and like colonizing Pern and all of like the backstory to it. And like, oh my God, these characters are these names. That's where these names for these places came from. And finding out why some of those holds were named, like who they were named for, I'm like, but why? Why would you do that? Sean and Sorka were two of my favorites. Like their story was beautifully done, and my inner horse girl was super enthused at the level of horses that were put in book one, or sorry, in Dragon's Dawn. But I loved it. I thought that was just so well done. And I'm right there with Marisa. Like when she was telling me about like she had to go back and read that chapter again, like I started getting teared up. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta go read it. Like, ooh, so good, so good.
Wendy?
I think I'm with Carol and I believe Lee that the first six books are my favorite. They're the ones that I read over and over when I was a junior high and in high school and really connected with. I have read some of the other ones that came later, but I don't know if I've read all of them. And it sounds like, thanks to Dennis, I may have to look up another book here. I may have read it. It sounds vaguely familiar, but I just the thought of having an Annie McCaffrey book that maybe I haven't read, that's a very tantalizing thing to know. But yeah, I really, my favorite is the Harper Hall trilogy with Dragon Song, Dragon Singer, and Dragon Drums. I love the exploration of the southern continent and the discovery of Avis and how they just slowly began to realize that they haven't always been there and that they came from somewhere else. And the archaeological kind of aspect of it was really fascinating to me too. Because, what we have many ancient civilizations that boggle our minds, and they're just sitting there in the ground, and we need to investigate them more fully as well. So this all touches on things that play into our own society and what we might do. So yeah, it's those first books though. I love the dragon, the Harper Hall trilogy, and I love the story with Lessa and basically the first three, and of course the White Dragon. That's really one of the best books in the series. So, but all of them have something to offer, and it's just fun to explore per.
Marisa?
So, one of the many things that Anne McCaffrey did incredibly well was lay out why Pern didn't change very much for so long until it did. And I loved going back to the plague times. Who knew what life I would live? But Marita's ride, I should have been prepared for a tragedy. I was not fully prepared for the tragedy. And I also was like 14, I think, when I read it. So wow, you have such big emotions as a teenager. The sob that I sobbed reading that book. But so I don't know that that's my time. That'd be a pretty dark time to choose, I think. But I do love how she would just go back and fill in the history of Pern. And like, I know there are people out there who are like, oh, this thing didn't match, and oh, this thing. But they were such small things compared to what she made sense of at like hundreds of years. May we all be that lucky, like in our books. So I mean, it's probably the main line, right? Like Lessa through there's one weir to all the weirs of Pern. Like, come on, that's an amazing run. But I have a soft spot for Marita, although justice for them.
Kacey?
So one of the most poignant things for me when I first read when I read Dragonflight was this image of the mostly empty weir, right? Anne McCaffrey has been quoted multiple times as saying that in essence, weirs are armed camps, right? They're like military bases. I grew up on military bases. And many of the places that I used to live no longer exist. And so for me, I I love the Marita Dragon Lady of Pern book very much like what Marisa said, but it's because I love the juxtaposition of this is what Dragon Rider culture was like at the height of a pass when, their wares were full and they were at their fighting strength. And this is how they were designed to function. I love that window into it, particularly from the perspective of someone who grew up around, on military bases in a military organization and then joined a military organization as an adult and chose that as my career going forward. That for that reason, I'm with Marisa. And the initial trilogy, Dragonflight, Dragon Quest, and The White Dragon will always, that is a pinnacle of literary achievement right there. But I love the perspective that Marita gives us, particularly in juxtaposition to the beginning of the first trilogy.
Mhm.
So in Dennis, and going back to your dragons in space, one of the things that grabbed me at that age that really fascinated me beyond everything else was the notion of threadfall, right? The threads, the plagues, that notion of the cycles, but the really that as an element in this world and the level of how this impacted culture and technology and everything that had to go on. For me, geeky little me that, might have read a little bit too much of Discover magazine back in the day. Um, that was one of those things I found fascinating was that aspect. So, Dennis, how did this notion of thread fall and how that impacted the world and the stories as to how they work to deal with that? What did that do for you?
I thought it was an interesting bad guy, basically. This was a world where, yeah, some of the people weren't so nice and all of that, but the villain, if you will, the big crisis wasn't a person. It was completely indifferent to everything, and it destroyed everything in its path. Um, my first inkling that they were talking about, science fiction things was when, the AGN03 and realizing, oh, wait, I I can look that up and figure out what that is. That's actually a chemical. Um, again, for me, the science fiction tie-ins and how subtle they were worked in at first, I really, really enjoyed that world building. And I'll never forget how I felt when Kampf went there. And, that whole sequence when he's falling from the sky. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was such a wonderfully written story. Yeah.
Carol?
It was, as Dennis said, it was such an unthinking adversary. There was no reasoning with this. There was no negotiating. There was no way to make peace with it. It was implacable. It was unapproachable. It simply existed, and they had to deal with it or perish. Um, and not only had they developed this extremely sophisticated system of doing that with the dragons and everything, then they went into like hiatus. It was in remission for decades, and I think even like a century or something. And
400
then,
years.
nobody
Correct.
believes in it anymore. And they have to go around saying, guys, it's coming around. And everyone's like, that's an old fairy tale. It's like, what are you talking about? So not only has it, formed their history and their society, then they have to like re-educate everybody about it because it's happening again. Um, and and they have to remember how to do it. The dragons are okay, but they have to remember, what did we do? How did we deal with this? And how do we deal with the effects of it when we aren't able to stop it? And the change that wreaks on the complacency that the weirs have, and that the cities have fallen into, the disregard that the weirs were experiencing. Everyone's like, oh, we don't need those anymore. Like, they're just a drain on the resources. No, no, they're not. They're saving your ass. But Thread has no fucks to give, and there's no way to deal with that except to marshal every resource you can. And that's pretty terrifying. That's pretty terrifying. It can annihilate you without blinking an eye because it doesn't have eyes to blink.
Melissa?
I could not agree more. Holy crap, that concept of an enemy that did not, it didn't care because it didn't think. It was implacable. It was unstoppable. You couldn't negotiate with it. There was no choice but to fight it. And what I thought was really, really cool was against that backdrop of something that you had no choice but to fight, it wasn't a united Pern, right? It wasn't like we are all gonna fight the good fight because we're one team. Let's go. No, it was, I'm like, holy crap. You have people that don't believe. You have people that are actively working to undermine everything the Dragon Riders exist to protect. And that was super cool to me, especially when I was coming up from like, well, everything is black and white. Like when you're reading the kid stuff, right? It's good versus evil. Everybody's either a good guy or a bad guy. There's very clear lines. And Anne McCaffrey did not do that. You had those varying shades of gray. And like Marisa said, even our heroes were kind of assholes. And it was wonderful. So I really appreciated that she had that backdrop of man versus nature, essentially, and how we can work together and how we can very much just shoot ourselves in the foot.
Wendy?
Yeah, Thread was a very interesting aspect of Pern because they did have this enemy that would unite them periodically, and during the down periods, things would fall apart. That's how I guess Fax got started and was causing wars in Less's time. Um, and because they didn't believe that the enemy was going to come, and so let's do our power plays and all this kind of stuff, as people sometimes are wont to do. But I really liked as the stories went on that solutions just kept cropping up. It was just maybe they forgot about it, or maybe it was in place and it was working, but nobody knew it was there. I'm thinking about the grubs on the southern continent. They were taking care of the thread, made the land very safe. That's why it was so lush and verdant when they discovered it, and they couldn't understand why, because, doesn't thread eat everything? Nope. Um, so they had more than just one way to combat this thing. And I really loved the way of human ingenuity permeates all of Pern. And maybe that's one of the reasons why we love it so much. I mean, we love the dragons, but they were actually a construct of human scientists taking fire lizards and turning into these giant beasts that could take care of things. The grubs in the Southern Count, again, it's human ingenuity combating a ecological problem that they had to deal with. And I think that's a very hopeful thing, especially today when we're dealing with a planet that is being destroyed by various actions of many countries and people. And yet there are people out there healing it with their own ingenuity. So I think we can take a page from Pern about things like that.
Marisa?
The scene in, I think, Dragon's Dawn, when Thread starts to fall and two of the characters are stuck under an overhang in a lake while a cow gets eaten alive in front of them. I already was horrified by Thread, but that scene lives rent-free in my head when I'm trying to come up with something like just horrifying. Because that's horrifying. And the fact that Thread score, like whenever the dragons got injured fighting this to save all of humanity, they were being eaten in tiny pieces, and like had to go between like that was incredibly well done. And the fact that part of dragons having really short memories is like by the next one they're not. It's like childbirth, right? Your brain just rewrites itself. It's fine. You can do it again. Have more kids. Don't worry about it, guys. Like it is a horrifying enemy for all the reasons everybody said. And that one scene where you first see it slowly devour a living cow, while two of our point of view characters are just like frozen, literally, because they can't go anywhere because they too will be eaten. Because Thread doesn't, it's like the honey badger. So here we are, like Carole said.
All right, Kacey. So the honey badgers are coming to you. What?
Um, so one of the things that, and I don't know, maybe I'm a one note princess here for this panel, but one of the things that struck me so much that Anne did so well is nobody survives violent confrontation without a scar, whether it's physical or emotional or mental. Those things stay, they affect you, they change you, right? It's like a tagline for a video game series that war never changes. And I always add to that, but it always changes you. And so even on Pern, where the enemy is a mindless, space spore, basically, in some ways that makes it more terrifying, because again, you can't reason with it. You can't call a ceasefire. You can't, the only choice is to get out there and destroy it. But what does that do to you? What are those scars that you're left with? And one of the things that Anne did so well was she showed that in the Dragon Riders' personalities, because while they're dragons, may have forgotten being burnt and eaten alive by a mindless ribbon of organic material, their writers remembered and and kept those things and felt those things. And you know, when you lose someone that you're close to, when you lose someone you've trained with, when you lose someone that you've, that you've been through combat with, that stays with you too. And that was something that I thought Anne did very well, handled very, very well. And really was sort of a she illustrated how it makes you different, right? And part of the, while Thread is the overall great villain of the story, one of the things that is also really interesting of it, and I think this was something that either Lee or Carol, I apologize, I've been so caught up in the discussion, I don't remember who said it, but mentioned that was that, you have all these various facets of society dealing, figuring out or having opinions on how do we deal with this thing, or do we even need to deal with this thing? And then you have the direct combatants here of the Dragon Riders saying, okay, well, I mean, yes, we have to deal with it, and it's going to, we're going to put our lives on the line for you. So how do we reconcile that with how you feel and what you think about us, right? And that's a perpetual problem for anyone who, serves in any sort of military capacity, because how do you reconcile being trained in the art of violence with living in a society that values nonviolence?
Lee?
For me, Thread was terrifying, of course. Um, and everything that everybody said so far, I'm in complete agreement with. Now, to me, the importance of it is the fact that for there were 400 turns, 400 years of no threadfall, and yet the Weir stayed training and maintaining things like no greenery around domiciles, and what kept that going was the importance of oral tradition, be it poem, tune, or tale. Um, the Harper Hall basically kept it in the memory of the populace because that was their job from the get-go. Do you teach them by song and poem? You counsel as a when you're dealing with the lord holders and such. You're educating the populace. You keep that going so that when the interval finally ends, you at least have it in their minds. This is what you do. And to me, any society that's going to make it is going to have that kind of societal memory, whether it be outside or inside, whether it be artificial or kept alive through a Harper Hall or a Bardic College. We've been doing it that way pretty much from the get-go. And the fact that McCaffrey picked up on that and brought it to life so beautifully. I refer to Saint Ed a lot. That's why.
Well, and I mean, looking at the level of just, for lack of a better term, soulless destruction that comes along with Threadfall, I think the other part, which is really the heart and the soul of the series, are the dragons and the relationship between the dragons and riders. So, Carol, and I'm just going to kind of leave this a little more open because I know we're kind of coming on time, but I want you to be able to dive in and talk about what that relationship means for you, and how all that plays out for you. So, Carole.
I love so deeply the telepathic bond between a writer and the dragon. And I'm pretty sure someone else, I think maybe Melissa had touched on it, that this being loves you regardless. It knows you, it knows everything about you, and it loves you. It is the epitome of unconditional love. And the writers reciprocate it because you know what? The dragons aren't perfect either. Okay. Dragons have their asshole moments. And and they're sentient and they're intelligent and everything, but yet they are also bound by their own animal instincts and reflexes, just as people are. And so they have those moments where the writer has to say, chill out, dial it down. You can't just go off and, shoot fire at them. And, you've got to, so they're working together as this incredible unit. And God Almighty, who wouldn't love having that, And then in later books, then we have the fire lizards, and all of a sudden, ordinary people who would never be dragon riders could have a fire lizard and impress with them, and have their own little, perpetual little baby toy dragon. And that was a big change for the society, because all of a sudden people who could not comprehend the fact that the dragon riders and dragons had this, this irrevocable bond, got it. They could understand it now. And even people around them could understand it better because they could see their child, their spouse, their cousin, their best friend with this little fire lizard, and how they worked together. And the understanding, therefore, for the dragon riders themselves really increased, but yeah, I don't even care about riding the dragons. I just want to have the telepathic bond with the dragon. Yeah, it just one of the most beautiful constructs in the books. And we've seen them in other stories and stuff. I mean, what is it? The demons in his Dark Materials and things like that. And people have their little familiar there and stuff like that. But she had it so early and so pure. It was such a pure bond that it's just to this day moving and remarkable. And damn it, why can't we have it too?
All right, Melissa, how about for you? How, our dragons and our riders?
Oh my God. Like I know I kind of touched on it like Carole said, but that concept to me of another being that loved you at a soul deep level that you loved back, life-changing. Like I loved it so much that I like Kacey based half my day, if not my whole life, around this concept, this chasing that high of like discovering Pern and realizing that there is more, like Valdemar with the companions, and that bond that Mercedes Lackey developed was also wonderful and really appealing to my horse girl self. But dragons and flying, because yes, I definitely wanted to fly on my green dragon. It was just beautiful, that whole concept. I want my dragon. Do you hear me? I want my dragon.
I'll get right on the genetic engineering.
I love you so much. I appreciate you.
Wendy?
Yeah, that bond is incredible. When I was a kid, I grew up riding horses even before I could ride a bicycle. And the bond between the dragon and rider reminded me a great deal of the bond I would have with my horse. And I just had one, and that bond was very pure and very loving and affectionate, but going both ways. But of course, we could never talk. But dragons can talk to you too, and still have that loving relationship. And oh, I would have loved that just to continue that with my horse, if nothing else. But to have a dragon and to be able to fly and to go anywhere you want instantly because of being able to go between. A dragon represents freedom to the maximum too, and love, and just it's just a wonderful thing. But then it's grounded in that military culture where they were there because of their duty. They lived in the wear. They had certain things they had to do. They had to take care of all those dragons. Can you imagine having to scrub by hand with a broom, essentially, a beast that is almost the size of a house? I mean, that's a heck of a lot of work. You got to really love that beast to take care of that animal that way and scrub it and oil it and do all that. Oh my goodness. Every time I read that, I kind of went, oh my goodness. A lot of work went into that. But when you do it for someone you love, the work is just effortless. And I think that translated very well in the books.
Marisa?
Yeah, the number of times I read every impression scene we got in a book, I can't even tell you. 90% of the things that I loved doing in fanfic were the relationships between dragons and writers, and making the dragon as sassy as possible in most cases, which plays out in my writing, guys. I've yet to have like a dragon soul bond sort of thing, but there always seems to be a voice in somebody's head that's really snarky, and that is 100% dragon influenced. Anne McCaffrey dragon influenced. But it was like folks said this early on. I was a lonely, weird little kid, and the idea that somebody would love me for every single bit of me, not just the parts that I was taught were okay. I mean, how can you not want to be obsessed with that? And exactly like Wendy said, I could just go between and see like the one other person in the world who likes me. Okay, great. Like, let's go. Take my bud. We go traveling. I can see everything. Sure, I have to clean them. That's fine. Like, I had to clean an RV. It didn't thank me. Like, it's, bring me this the sentient soul bonded animal companion. I am here for it.
Kacey?
So I actually have
You have a dragon? You've been holding
well,
it on us?
I have a helicopter, or I did have a helicopter, and I used to have to wash the helicopter, and I hated washing the helicopter until one time I was actually talking with Marisa, and I was like, you know what? This is like all of those fan fiction storylines when the brand new Dragon Riders, the Werelings, would have to go and, like spend hours in the lake washing their, and you guys, as silly as that sounds, it actually made it better and more fun to get out there with my like long-handled scrub brush and wash the damn helicopter that I used to fly. So that was when I was flying civilian helicopters in the military. It's a different process, but yeah, it's like everyone else said, right? I was a weird kid. I was too smart for my own good, and I knew it, which made it even worse. And I, was awkward and didn't have a lot of friends. Plus, we were moving around all the time, with my parents' career and stuff. And so the idea of this being that knew me intimately, loved me, on a cellular level, and was not all powerful, but incredibly powerful, was so compelling, right? And like Melissa said, I to a certain extent have spent the remainder of my life sort of chasing that high, and then flying, right? Being able to fly, and now having flown, I can tell you it's worth it.
And Carole, I know you got to hop in a minute, so do you want to let everybody know where to find you?
Sure. You can find me as Carole Stokes on Facebook, especially in ConTinual and on ConTinual panels. And as Ellis Colton, all of my social media links are at elliscolton.com. And my latest book, The Malevolent Sea, which is a sequel to my paranormal romance, The Case of Thistledown House, is coming out in June. Thanks, y'all. Great to see you.
Thanks, Carole. So, Lee, what about it when you saddle up to your dragon?
Ah, okay. I'm about to out myself. I am, in fact, a confirmed devout and practicing romantic. Okay? Now, nobody say anything. I don't want the general public to know. But to me, the linking that takes place during impression is my definition of a type of romance. It is, in its simplest form, finding the other half of your soul. When Jackson impressed Ruth, I'm streaming tears like crazy. The even the impression of the fire lizards got to me to a certain extent. But it is that kind of melding, that kind of, okay, I am now complete kind of thing. And it's simplistic as all get out, but that's where I go with it.
Dennis?
I'm going to go in a slightly different direction with it because there's an aspect of the relationship between the dragons and the riders that was part of I call it's like a brick in my foundation of who I am. And that was the fact that the Green Riders were male, but the dragons were female, and they still mated. And nobody really thought anything of it. It was just, yep, this is what happens, and she moved on. And as a kid, this was about the same time that I was told that the reason my great uncle Al never got married was because he lived with a guy named Edo, and they were a couple. And okay, and then that became a non-issue, which, led to my whole attitude towards people who are gay. I don't care. Go ahead, be gay. It's something that you're born with. And she said something about that it was a special kind of guy who would be a Green Rider. And that resonated with me. Yeah, so it's a little bit different, but
So, like many large and complex universes, we can only really kind of start to scratch the surface. So, this is that time for what do you think we need to touch on while we're here? So, Melissa, I'm going to go to you first. What's something we haven't talked about or something you want to spend some more time on? You know, tell me how to clone, how I can start engineering these things. I'll pull the CRISPR out of the closet.
Oh
You
my
know,
God. I don't. Oh, the one time I don't have a ready answer because I mean we've covered the dragons, we talked about the fire lizards, um, we've talked about the politics a little bit and Harper Hall and how essential it was. I really don't have anything off the top of my head other than I really, really want. If I think one of our friends, I think it was Joel Rises, said it. If wishing could have made me appear on those hatching sands, I would be in Pern right now. So I think that is my takeaway is that the lasting impression and the lasting effect that the series has had on so many people, readers, authors, like it has influenced an entire generation. So I would urge anybody watching this, if you have not read it, go check it out from your library. It holds up so well and it's amazing.
mhm.
Wendy?
Oh shoot, I had an idea and it kind of passed through me, I'm afraid. I've just been enjoying talking about Pern just so much, especially with my fellow writers, because I think we see stories more in a different way maybe than just a casual reader would. Because we understand the craft, and it takes a lot to get us to really sink into a story, and but naturally we all did with Annie, right? Because what an accomplished, wonderful writer she was. Um, I think in my case, Oh, I kind of wish that I kind of wish that maybe some of the technology came out earlier, or maybe what I'm trying to say is Pern is often referred to as a fantasy, but it really isn't. It is true science fiction at its core. And even the author herself was very adamant to say that this is a science fiction book. And whenever people would say, oh, it's just fantasy or whatever, no, it had great world building. It was grounded in actual science. And these details is what I think draws so many people into it because you can see the correlations between our reality and this world that she's created. The culture does go back to European roots, which is familiar enough for people that they can just poof right on into the story without thinking about it, which again is very good. To create a good read for our reader. It just has so many things to offer on so many levels beyond the original concepts, beyond the great storytelling and writing style. It's just a series you got to experience. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
Marisa?
I will also argue anyone who says just a fantasy. I know you didn't, Wendy, but like anyone who says that, absolutely not. Fantasy is amazing. I will fight. However, in this case, author's intent was sci-fi. One of the things Anne McCaffrey did incredibly well, which is like all I have to say about everything she did, I guess, is it was like step one, entertain. Step two, she had stuff to say. So she entertained first. So you don't have to go deep. Like Dennis said, there was stuff about LGBT in there. There was stuff about gender dynamics. There was stuff about social classes. There was stuff about different expectations per where you were born, per gender. Like it was complicated and it was nuanced and it wasn't the point because she wasn't there to lecture you about it, but she was there to say, here are things. Do what you will. Do you think Lessa should have been a judge when she effectively changed the course of this planet's history? Who can say? I can say, absolutely not. She should have been full queen rider all day. But I loved that she did that because it was enough that it was an amazing story about dragons and their riders when I was 9. And it was enough when I was in my 20s and 30s to be picking out other things. And I know there are people now who are getting super into fantasy and super into dragons. And I strongly recommend you read it. And yes, it was written in the 60s and it was written in the 70s. And so some things might not jive with you, but we wouldn't be where we are if stories like that hadn't happened. And I firmly, firmly believe that. And that's the thing I could talk about all day with Anne McCaffrey.
Kacey? What haven't we touched on?
So Marisa sort of alluded to this just now, but one of my favorite things, and this is a potentially controversial opinion, so hot take, one of my favorite things that Anne did and did so skillfully, like she did with everything else, is she represented a society in which women and men had, sort of as the default, pretty different gender roles. And she both showed the injustices that came out of that, especially with like Manali's story and, wanting more for herself than to live the life that her mother had lived. And, sort of course, her family was also pretty abusive. So that also sucked, but again, there's those nuances and those situations that Marisa was talking about. But the other thing that she did that I personally loved was she represented sort of traditionally feminine gender roles at, like taking care of domestic matters, if you will. She represented that in a way that made it something noble that she didn't just say, okay, well, the only path to greatness as a woman is to cast off your gender role and go and do amazing things. She pointed out that there were very powerful women who had adhered to the roles of their society. And in fact, she had both in her story, which I think is fully reflective of how life really is, right? Like we have incredible women who are groundbreaking and kicking in glass ceilings and doing amazing things. Um, and we have incredible women who, are choosing to raise their families. And it's both paths are worthy. And that's something that Anne did very well, I thought.
Lee?
Um, two small ones. Um, to me, the the whole series, particularly the original six and all the Warriors of Pern. Um, if you as a writer are planning to write a bard, read Robinson, read the Dragonrider series, because even including my own work, that McCaffrey's Robinson is the definitive by the book bard. The second thing is, um, if you're writing essentially sex, read the sections on dragon flights, because she gets the rhythm, she gets the pacing, she gets the intensity. I was in tears. Um, there's a lot to learn from McCaffrey. Go forth and do it.
All right, Dennis, you get the last word.
Well, they covered all the good stuff, so I'm going to cover the one thing we haven't talked about that still actually sticks with me to this day, the gatherings. I can still feel a hot bubble pie in my palm and the taste and the juice. The way she described it has stayed with me. And I want a bubble pie.
I have a recipe.
Yeah.
All right, well, if you share it, we'll tag it on the end of the episode. But before we get out of here and before we all go riding into one sunset or another, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. Websites, social media, and what of yours people need to be putting onto that to be read pile. So, Kacey, you're up first.
Sorry, I couldn't find the little clicky thing. You can find me at kaceyezell.net or .com. That is my website where all of my books are listed. All my social media is there. You can also join my fan community there. The basic level is free, and you get my newsletter and some free short stories. And then if any super fans out there wanted to support me directly, you could join my paid tiers too, for some early access to my current works in progress, which right now is book 2 of my latest release that just came out, called Mage Light. It is my fantasy adventure with a strong, Marisa's got it, thank you, ma'am, with a strong reverse harem romantic subplot. So no sex on the page, but a lot of that sort of tension and attraction that Lee was sort of talking about too. So yeah, so that's my latest, and I would love for you to go check it out.
Lee?
You can find me, including the links to my other social media, my e-store, bibliography, general nonsense when I get a chance to write, at Harphaven, HARPHAVEN.net, with the links hither and yon.
Dennis?
Yeah, you can find all my social media links and links to my books at automatedempire.com. All my books are on Amazon, and you can buy the ebooks anywhere ebooks are sold. I have 3 more books in the pipeline that will be coming soon.
Melissa?
You can find me at melissaolthoff.com or .net. I am on all the socials now because apparently this is how we do. And I have, loved Anne McCaffrey and Dragonriders so much. I wrote a book about, Yeah, that one. Thank you, Marisa. So, Rise from Ruin, I thought I was going to write a book about dragon riders, and this utterly ridiculous, insanely brave griffin popped in my head and said, "Ha ha ha, you think you are." And that is out June 3rd from Baen Books.
Wendy?
Anyway, you can find me, as most poets are found, on Instagram, and my handle there is No Wasted Ink. And on Instagram, I do have a link tree on that little link at the very top, and that'll take you everywhere. My website, which is wendyvancamp.com, and you can find my newsletter, which is free and monthly. It features a ramble, a writing tip essay for those of you who like writing, and my poem of the month. And you can find that at nowastedink.substack.com. And if you're not tired of my voice yet, it also comes with a voiceover with me doing the narration. So.
Marisa?
MarisaWolf.net, MarisaWolf.com. I go both ways, like many a green writer. And if you like snarky voices in people's heads and sci-fi, you can check out Beyond Enemies that came out last year from Baen Books. And if you like tiny angry dragons who have a lot of opinions about things, you can, thanks, Melissa, you can check out A Plague of Magic, which comes out this September. I believe there will be copies at DragonCon if you're a Dragon Conner. Yeah, and there's a tiny angry dragon and a whole lot of trouble.
And you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, creatingprose.com, and of course here at ConTinual, as well as a bunch of these conventions we've been talking about. And until then, go stack up those to-be-read piles, or let us know how to create the bubbling pie.